Hello. Today we're going to be talking about some of the lesser known presidents. This country has had 47 presidents, and unfortunately, not every president gets remembered. If you can't think of something they did during their presidency, or even that they were a president, then I think that counts as forgotten. First up, William Henry Harrison was the ninth president of the United States, and got inaugurated in 1841. He is often forgotten, and it's kind of hard to see why. He accomplished so much in his 1 month as president. During his inauguration, he didn't wear a coat, got a cold, and since a cold was basically a death sentence in those times, he died a few weeks later. This is basically the only thing he's remembered for because it's basically the only thing he did. Our next president to be forgotten is actually number 10, Harrison's vice president, John Tyler. He served the rest of Harrison's term until 1845 but wasn't reelected. Back in those times, the 25th Amendment had not been created by Congress yet, so no one really knew what to do if a president died. John Tyler saw the power vacuum and an opportunity. He grabbed a judge to issue the oath of office and declared himself president. He then spent the rest of the term arguing with Congress over whether or not he was actually the president. Also, he never filled the vice president's office. I can imagine him pulling a Dwight Schrute and retaining the title of vice president while being president. These next two are kind of a repeat of the last two. Zachary Taylor became the 11th president in 1849. He dealt with some problems like Mexican cession, new territories, and slavery, and then died a year later, and his vice president, Millard Fillmore, took over for the rest of the term and was not reelected. And guess what? Millard Fillmore also did not fill the office of the vice president. Rutherford B. Hayes was the 19th president and served as the third Republican president. He actually lived through all 4 years of his term. Nice job, what an accomplishment. Relatively speaking, there wasn't a ton of turmoil during his term. The Civil War is over, and President Grant before him had dealt with the fallout of the Civil War. Sadly for President Hayes, he just didn't do anything that was extremely noteworthy. He also only served one term. This is kind of a running theme with these forgotten presidents. Our next president is James Garfield. He was number 20 and started serving his term in 1881. If anybody watches Salmonella, you probably know this guy. It's kind of shocking that more people don't know this guy since he's one of only 4 presidents to be assassinated. Essentially, Charles Guiteau was pissed that Garfield didn't give him a job and shot him. Garfield lived for 2 months as doctors poked around in him to try and take out the bullet. They probably made things worse though, as they gave him infections, and that would actually be what he would die from. He was only president for 6 months, and his vice president, Chester Arthur, took over and completed the term. Chester also didn't fill the vice presidency. It was just normal to not have a VP for 4 years. What if the VP turned president died and didn't have a VP to replace him? This seemed pretty likely, as most of these forgotten presidents died of a cold, of infections from their doctors, or diarrhea from eating too many cherries. Yes, that's how Zachary Taylor died. Grover Cleveland was actually president 22 and 24. He first got elected in 1885, then re-elected in 1893. He had 2 different vice presidents. I guess he wanted to try something new for a second term. He would often use his veto powers against Congress, especially when they wanted to implement some high tariffs. For the longest time, he was the only president to have served 2 non-consecutive terms as president, until a certain orange president came along and took that one thing away from him. The president in between Cleveland's 2 terms was President 23, Benjamin Harrison. He was actually the grandson of William Henry Harrison. I guess he learned from his grandfather and wore a coat because he served all 4 years of his term. Tariffs were still a big issue during his term, and he would argue with Congress over them. Our next president is only somewhat forgotten, William McKinley. He was president at 25 and actually served in Congress before becoming president and caused a lot of the tariff arguments with the last couple presidents. He did like his tariffs, however, not everyone liked him. On September 6, 1901, an anarchist shot McKinley twice in the abdomen. He lived for several days but eventually succumbed to his wounds. A certain Vice President Theodore Roosevelt took over as president. He would also get an attempted assassination, but he would live through his. It's weird that Garfield and McKinley make up 50% of successful presidential assassinations, and yet barely anyone talks about them, except a certain orange president. We are now in the 20th century, and there are only a few presidents that have slipped through the cracks. First one, William Howard Taft, from 1909 to 1913. He is in between Roosevelt and Wilson, and is kind of lumped in with the progressive era presidents, but was slightly more conservative than them. Taft is perhaps best known as the fat president who got stuck in the White House tub. Unfortunately, that story does not seem to be true, as funny as it would be. However, after his one term as president, Taft would later serve as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and was appointed by President Harding. I can imagine Harding being on the phone being like, "Hey fat ass, you still haven't paid off your new tub. Back to work." This makes Taft the only person to serve as Chief Justice and President. Speaking of Harding, he was president from 1921 to 1923. During that time, he clearly made some judicial appointments, and then died. and his VP, Calvin Coolidge, took over and eventually won re-election. And this completes our list of somewhat forgotten presidents. Now, I'm going to predict which presidents will be forgotten 100 years from now, assuming the human race is still alive. In my opinion, most of the post-World War II presidents are fairly well remembered now because they were presidents not that long ago. However, as time goes on and we get new presidents, some will start to be forgotten, and I'm going to try and predict those ones. FDR was the only president to get elected 4 times and was president during most of World War II, so it's unlikely he'll be forgotten. Truman ruined a couple Japanese cities, so it's unlikely he'll be forgotten, especially by the Japanese. Eisenhower was a war hero and helped in the civil rights movement with things like the Little Rock Nine, so he'll probably be well known. JFK literally got blown away, so I doubt he'll get blown away. His successor, however, Lyndon B. Johnson, is a bit less notable. He did a lot for civil rights, but never really had a dramatic factor that makes people go down in history. Nixon will certainly be remembered for Watergate. Gerald R. Ford, however, he only served 1 term, and is basically only known for scamming his way into the presidency. Jimmy Carter might be remembered, but he only served 1 term and was kind of a weak president during the Cold War. But he did do a lot of good stuff after losing re-election, and lived up to the ripe old age of 100. Reagan will definitely be remembered for being a guns-out badass and screwing the economy for anyone who isn't rich. George H.W. Bush might be less remembered. He only served 1 term and lost re-election. Bill Clinton will probably go down in history as someone who took very good care of the economy, and took less good care of his marriage. George W. Bush will certainly be remembered for a small little event that happened during his presidency. Obama was the first black president, so 100% he'll be remembered. Trump was the first orange president, so he'll be remembered too. Also, he had a new scandal every other day, so that might factor in. And he incited an insurrection, he was impeached twice, he illegally paid a porn star to keep quiet during his campaign, and then he got re-elected 4 years later. Yeah, people in the future are going to be confused about that one. Biden is probably going to be forgotten. Almost everything about him is either directly or indirectly tied to Trump. The man is completely in Trump's shadow. The only unique thing about him is that he is the oldest person to serve as president, and Trump is going to take that away from him.